very strongly in the book, which I've just had the pleasure of reading. I heard it said that at age 5 you were asked what were the things you loved most in the world, and you said smoked salmon and bark. So could you tell us a bit about your early years?
Well, first of all, 70 years later, that's still the case. I had some smoked salmon this morning, and maybe I'll have some bark later. It's nice being here, although I'm a little frightened by your serried rows. I'm actually happy to be in a chemistry lab, and I regard the periodic table as my friend. And although it appears that W stands for Waterstones, it also stands for tungsten. I'm actually one of the less musical members of a musical family. My father was extremely musical, and I think could have been a professional. He was a general practitioner, but a general practitioner who always carries miniature orchestral scores in every pocket. And he would sort of pull them out between patients. And I don't know what word to use, read them or play them. He'd often maintain that he didn't need a record player because he could hear everything in full orchestral complexity from the scores and modify it as he heard it. My mother was at the opposite extreme. She had difficulty keeping a tune in mind, but she loved music, and she actually loved singing. And I feel wistful at memories of her slightly off-key renderings of some Schubert songs. And I'm somewhere in between. I can't hear a whole orchestra in my mind like my father, but I play the piano a bit, and when I think of pieces I know, I find my hands moving automatically, and I see a piano in front of me. And so I grew up in a household which was, in a way, full of music, and music has always been crucial for me, one way or another. I have to have a radio or a record player. I'm showing my generation when I talk about the record player. I don't have an iPod, and I have mixed feelings about iPods. I saw something on an iPod that was almost killed this morning. And you would cross the road like this, and iPods are wonderful, but it's dangerous to be so engrossed in music that you don't see the traffic. And even schizophrenics are not that engrossed. But I think there can be complete perceptual occlusion. But I don't need to talk about that.
So shall we come on to a few of the sort of highlights of the book, or just a few snippets really to whet your appetite? In my own work, which focuses on music, I've really noticed that a lot of people think that they're very poor at music unless they've got a formal musical training, and they underestimate what an accomplishment it is for the brain to actually be able to make sense of any musical sound, let alone appreciate it so much that we, spend a lot of our income on it. So I think what's very interesting in your book is to see how things can go wrong in the brain, and how an absence of music is, it's only when we have an absence of music or distorted music that it becomes so obvious that music is so critical. So I mean, in cases of amusia, people can't make sense of musical sound. And you've written about your own experiences of amusia.
Well, this is something beyond. Well, first, as you say, Lauren, you're not just given music any more than you're given the visual world. You think you're given the visual world full of sort of colour and depth and movement and texture and meaning, but in fact, any of these things can be knocked out individually, and you realise what a huge, complex orchestration the brain has to make to give you a visual world or a musical world. And different aspects of music can be knocked out specifically, starting with pitch. I think one needs to distinguish sort of ordinary tone deafness, which 5–8% of people are somewhat off-key, but they recognize tunes, they sing them, they love them, and it may irritate people and their neighbours who are not tone deaf. And I once actually had an extreme example of that. In a way, it drove me away from religion. A little synagogue, a little temple in the Bronx where I used to go to, and there was a cantor there who was extremely tone deaf, but very ambitious. And forms of cantillation, which you make elaborate tonal excursions and frills and twists, and you really have to have a good ear for this, and you have to hold to a tonal centre and come back home. And he would end up, I don't know, half an octave away. One day with a sort of an expression like Nietzsche's scream, I ran out of the synagogue in a state of agony. I've never been back since. But this isn't the real amusia. Well, I did have an experience, in fact 2 experiences of my own. And I think I hadn't quite imagined, been capable of imagining. I don't think actually one can really quite imagine what any neurological condition is like. You can imagine any psychiatric condition because we're all psychiatric, and you know what it's like to be Romeo or Hamlet. But you have to have an experience of amusia really to know it. And I was driving along in my car, listening to a Chopin ballade, which I knew well, and something started to happen. The richness of the tones started to disappear. An unpleasant reverberation came in, and finally I could hear nothing but a toneless, pitchless banging, as if on a steel sheet. Although the sense of rhythm and the rhythmic structure of the piece was perfectly preserved. So it was still the ballad to which something gruesome had happened. And I phoned up the radio station and I asked if this was some sort of joke or experiment. And they said, no, I should get my radio checked. But I had a second attack of this later, about a month later, when I was actually playing the piano, and this was coincident with having one of these brilliant, scintillating zigzags, which one can have in an attack of migraine. And so this was amusia as part of a migraine aura. I have to say I was quite terrified the first time. I wondered if I was having a stroke, and immensely relieved when the music came back.
Yes, okay, so there's your own amusia was a sort of prelude to this migraine, but there are people who have lifelong trouble of making sense of music, as we know, congenital amusia.
Yeah.
You've written about one of these people, Dolores.
Yeah. Though actually I first heard of this from a colleague of mine, a French neurologist called elated, and he said that when he heard music, he could either say it wasn't the Marseillaise or it wasn't. I forgot to ask him how he could tell it was the Marseillaise. I think he would have said that was because people stood up or saluted. But in that situation, no music is recognized. And I saw a patient, Dolores, very nice, intelligent woman, who described how even as a little girl, she had no idea what was going on with music. When other children were asked to sing their names, she couldn't sing it, and she didn't know what the other people were doing. She couldn't recognize any music. Her father got an old gramophone and tried to teach her, but this didn't help. Repeated exposures didn't help in the least. A family friend, a psychologist, tested her and found she really couldn't tell if one note was higher or lower than another unless there was a huge difference. So someone like Dolores can't hear tones or semitones. She didn't have the building blocks for constructing melody, tonality, music.